So if you have been with us through the first part of the year, all the way in here to the near end of March, you know that we have been in a series together as a church called Walk in the Way. It really encompasses a handful of things. One is we are reading through the Bible together each week, and there's a pretty good chunk of passages that we're reading. And if you have been reading along with us, you've already made your way through a portion of 1 Samuel. And if you haven't been reading, you can join in. It's never too late to hop in the Walk in the Way journey. You can find all the resources that you need at our website at stonepointchurch.com. There's actually a huge Walk in the Way tab. It's got resources for your family. There's devotionals that come out 3 times a week, and there's also a plan. And our plan actually continues tomorrow with 1 Samuel chapter 14 and 15. And here's the cool thing is when you get to 1 Samuel chapter 14, you begin to see how the nation of Israel is going to move from this period of judges to kings. And even though kings are not always wise and they don't always rule with God's heart, that's where the nation's going to find themselves. And 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel and 1 Kings and 2 Kings is going to give us the chronicles of all these kingdoms and all these kings of the Israelites, the north and the south and all those things. And so if you haven't been joining with us, we encourage you to jump in on the journey. Here's why it's important is because every single week we reflect backwards, we look at something we've read and we teach on it. And today I'm going to teach on 1 Samuel. And what's interesting about 1 Samuel is that you're going to see how there's really 3 P's that kind of come up. One is you're going to see in a second that Hannah petitions the Lord. You're going to see in a few moments that she prioritizes, along with her husband Elkanah, they prioritize their worship. And then you're also going to see this 3rd P in a few moments in which they realize that their child has a purpose. And that child's going to be Samuel. But here's the deal. What you need to realize is that in order to get to the place that they did, you have to have a plan. Now, y'all might not know this about Kelly and I, but we've been married almost 24 years. We have kiddos that are 16, 14, 13, and 5 months old, okay? Here's the cool thing about that, though, is that over the last 24 years, Kelly and I have averaged living in a house probably a couple of years. We've lived in like 11 different homes in 24 years, which is crazy. What that proves is that I have a wife who easily goes with the flow, okay? So I'm the high maintenance one in the relationship, and she's the easy, laid back going like, hey, whatever you think we should go, like she follows. And so here's the cool thing is that we've remodeled 7 houses together. Many of those we lived in, and some of them we didn't. We've also built 5 homes, many of which were for ourselves and some that were for our friends. But over the course of time, one of the things we always developed was a comprehensive plan. We never just started without some sort of plan. Now, for instance, when we were building our houses, one of the things that we learned really quickly is not only do you need a floor plan or a blueprint, but you also need engineered foundation plans. And the reason why is not because we just wanted a good engineered foundation. We actually wanted all of our concrete guys to bid on the same work. Because if you give it to a concrete guy, they're like, oh, I got an idea of how I should do it. You need this many piers, you need this many beams, you need this. And so it just was better to send it off to an engineered foundation plan. Now, the reason why is because if you don't have a solid comprehensive plan, your build is going to look different than what you hoped. For instance, if you wanted to start building and you poured a slab and you had no plans for framing or a roof line, you would have some very frustrated people on your job site. If you had no electrical plan, no plumbing plan, you're just kind of going with it as the days come, you're going to look up one day and be extremely frustrated. And the reason why is because this thing that was supposed to be a home could become a hazard simply because you don't have the plan in place. Now, let me ask you a question. If you were building a home from scratch, do you believe it would be wise to have a floor plan? Just raise your hand if you think, okay? Now, if you didn't raise your hand, I'm just not going to call you to be my home builder, okay? Now, here's why. You have to have a plan when you're building a home. And listen, it's also true when you're raising kids for the Lord. You have to have a plan. Matter of fact, faith formation doesn't just somehow come together. It doesn't just somehow happen. But what's interesting is that oftentimes that's the approach of families. So when we read the Bible, we need to realize that God never intended for faith families to happen accidentally. If you've been reading through, it was interesting when you got to Deuteronomy, God told Moses, you are to tell the people to raise their children with the word of God. They are to literally write it on the tablets of their heart, the frontlets of their eyes. You are to put it on your gates. You are to put it on your walls. You are to do you are to instruct them when they sit and when they rise, when they come and they go. It is to be a precedent in the family for the word of God. And when you see the declaration of Joshua in this period of conquest and victory where the people of Israel go 33-1 against their adversaries, Joshua says this in Joshua 24. He says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And when we read that, we see declaration. But I want to just encourage you that when he says that, that's not declaration, that's blueprint. He is saying we're going to do something different than all the other nations. And friends, my encouragement to you today is that as a church, we would recognize what's happening in Hannah and her husband Elkanah's life as she prays outside this sanctuary for God to give her a child. Now, we're not going to begin in the first part of 1 Samuel because there's a ton of names and places that are hard to pronounce, and we would all just struggle through it. And so instead of that, we're going to pick up in verse 12. Now, let me help you understand what's happening. This family is from Ramah, and they have gone up to the sanctuary, and it's there outside of the tabernacle that this woman is literally pouring out her heart before God. And here's why, is because she has been barren. She's wanted children, but hasn't been able to have children. Her husband Elkanah sees her grieving, but he had another wife as well. And she has ridiculed Hannah. She has made fun of her to the point where Hannah would stop eating because she was in such a low place. She was in darkness. And what's interesting is in darkness, oftentimes we have a tendency to isolate, but it's here that you see Hannah move forward in her faith. And so oftentimes we move backwards instead of forward, but Hannah moves forward. And you pick it up in verse 12. It says, and as she continued praying before the Lord, that's Hannah, Eli, that's the priest at the time and one of the judges of Israel, observed her mouth, and Hannah was speaking in her heart. Only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. Here's the picture. She's outside of the tabernacle in this open court where people could come, and it's likely that he observes her from a distance, and she looks like a mad woman, a drunken woman, in which he's going to approach her. In verse 14, it says, and Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But then Hannah answered him and said, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. Or all along I have been praying, speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. So she says, hey, don't regard me as just one of these people who's just coming by and is out of my mind and has no reason to be here. Don't regard me as a woman that is destitute or impoverished or spiritually empty. No, regard me as a woman who is crying out to the Lord out of my anxiousness, out of my vexation. I am tired. I am weary. I long for the next generation to come from me. I long for a child to be for God and as a servant to him, and yet I am empty and I am depleted. And instead of her withdrawing, she draws near to God in this prayer. And then Eli responds and answers in verse 17, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you your petition that you have made to him. And then she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. And then the woman went away, and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. It was in this moment that as she poured out her heart before God, as she drew near to him, that she found a peace in the midst of all of her anxiousness. And friends, I want you to realize it's in this moment that Hannah petitions the Lord. Like petitioning is pleading on behalf of the Lord. It's getting on your knees and it's just staying there for a long period of time, asking the Lord to mark that spot. And what's interesting is when you look at Hannah and her petition to the Lord, she's literally petitioning out of her pain. And that's okay to petition out of your pain. It's out of her pain that this prayer comes and she brings her burdens to God and she lays them at his feet. And she says, Lord, I am weary and I am anxious and I am tired of being made fun of being ridiculed, of being despised in this generation, because a woman that was barren in that day and time would have in many ways been thought by the culture and those in the Jewish area that she was cursed by God. And in many ways, she's like, Lord, I don't want to be a curse. I want to be a blessing. And here's what you need to realize is that Samuel's spiritual legacy began by his mother praying on her knees. And what you need to know too, friends, is that spiritual legacy oftentimes starts in that place. If you were wondering, well, have I dropped the ball with the next generation? Have I dropped the ball as a parent or as a grandparent? And then listen, the place to begin asking God is on your knees. You get by your bedside and say, Lord, help me to acknowledge the areas that my heart is anxious or where I'm wrestling in this area, where I feel like I could do a better job as a parent or as a grandparent or as a person of faith, and just pray to God. And here's what's cool is that when we come to the end of ourselves in these areas, it's when we find that God is all we have. And when we know that God is all we have, we also come to the realization that God is all we need. And I don't know if y'all believe that, but that is truly what the scriptures are pointing us to. And Hannah shows that in her prayer. God, I am here, and you get all of me, and I want all of you because all of you is all I need. And that's her prayer. And God meets her there. Look at verse 19. They rose early in the morning, and then they worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back into their house at Ramah. So here it is. She spent time outside of the tabernacle. She's prayed, petitioned the Lord. She went home with a glad spirit. She ate. Her belly was filled. The next morning, as a precedence in their house, they came back to the place because the priority in their family was worship. And so you see her petition the Lord, and then you see her and her husband Elkanah make this precedent here that worship was a priority for their family. Now think about this. When you see this, you need to note that oftentimes we reverse it in our culture. So we graduate high school, we live in our college days or our early years of vocation, and we kind of party it up, do our thing. We kind of run for the hills. We're tired of all the rules, the constrictions, the boring parts of church. It's really hard to disconnect our lives and the local church and from one another. But at the same time, we're like, but I don't really love it. It's stuffy. It's boring. We move from student ministry to big church, and it just seems different. And so we run for the hills, right? And then we have a child. And when we have a child, we're like, oh, snap. Something's got to change in my life because I don't want my child to turn out like me. And then we look for the local church again. And then we kind of pour out our hearts before God. But listen, I want you to see that that was not the way it was modeled here in Scripture. Hannah petitions the Lord, and she continues to do what she's always done as she worships the Lord with her husband. And what you see here is just a crazy example is that Samuel was born into a family that already had an established faith. Are y'all with me, church? She was born into a family. He was born into a family that already had an established, grounded mom and dad. And that is what we should desire for our own homes. Faithful families. What we ought to aim for. If you are raising kids right now, if you have a daughter who's 15, you have a daughter who's 17, what you ought to be doing is investing all your resources into helping her or him become a spiritual champion to where they don't have to have the wandering years in the wilderness that you had. That's faith formation. That is what Hannah and Elkanah, her husband, gave Samuel. And here's what you need to know. Surrendered child begins with surrendered parents. A surrendered child begins with surrendered parents. Children cannot produce on their own what they don't know how to produce. Now, is there a rare circumstance in which a child somehow becomes acquainted with the local church through kids ministry, student ministry, bus ministry and they grow up in the instruction of the Lord, yes, that is a rare thing. The reality is the thing that God desires is parents who petition the Lord and then prioritize their faith and raise children in the instruction of the Lord. Verse 19, it goes on, it says, and then Elkanah knew Hannah his wife. The Lord remembered her, and in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel. Samuel, it just means this, that God heard. It comes from two Hebrew words. Shemuel is the idea of to hear, and El at the very end is God. So God hears. Matter of fact, it says at the very end of verse 20, for she said, I have asked from him from the Lord. So she says, I petitioned the Lord and he heard me. Now, I don't know about you, that's cool. And so when you see the word Samuel there, it means that she petitioned, God heard, and God responded. That's the name. Verse 21 goes on and says, then the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow, which would have been potentially one of the feast, or it would have been one of the responsibilities for a Jewish man over the age of 20 to go to the tabernacle, and they could have brought tithes or offerings or other responsibilities that they would have had. We don't have all the details of this text, but what we do know is in verse 22 that Hannah decided to stay behind. In verse 22, it says this, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. When I read that word forever, I think about the Sandlot. That's what I think about. Forever. Yes. Can't read my Bible without thinking of other things, right? But here's what's interesting is that you need to know that there was some Jewish context and customs that she seems to avoid here. So what you need to know is that a firstborn was a prized possession in Israel, but even more when you had a firstborn son. That firstborn son would have then been required two things. One, a life for a life. So when you're reading through the law and Deuteronomy, and you're reading through Leviticus, and you're reading through Numbers and all these places, you're like, I can't read all that. What you need to know is that God is setting a precedent. And one of the precedents he sets is that he always requires a life for a life. So he says, don't murder, but if you do, it's going to cost you your what? Life. Hey, if you take their arm, it's going to cost you your, if you take their thumb, it's going to cost you your thumb. You take their eye, it's going to take your eye. You take their teeth, it's going to cost your teeth. You take their oxen, it's going to require your oxen. Well, one of the things that you see in the Old Testament is when you had a firstborn, it required a sacrifice as well. And it was a throwback to Egypt. And when God brought them out, he consecrated the firstborn. But he also says in order to consecrate the firstborn, you have to remember what happened in Egypt when I took the firstborn. And so he just said it's going to be a life for a life. Well, in this particular case, what would have been required would have been some sort of sacrifice within the first really 31 to 35 days in the life of Israel's child and whatever child was born. The other thing that you would notice is that they would have had to redeem that child with 5 shekels or 5 pieces of silver. And as they're doing these different things, it would have just been a symbol to the Lord that this is your child, but we're redeeming them for ourselves. But you don't get any mention of that in this text. What you do have is I'm going to hold the child until he's weaned. And in this culture, weaning was likely 3 years of age. So if you have children right now and you didn't feed them until they were 3 years of age, you're like, whew, thank goodness I wasn't a Jew, right? But that's how long it would have been. And so here, and interesting is you don't see that. Verse 23, Elkanah then replies to what she says, and he says, listen, do what seems best to you. Wait until you've weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she was weaned. Continue on in verse 24, and it says this. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull. They brought the child to Eli. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence praying to the Lord." And she just reminds him real quick, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me a handful of years ago. It's been a few years, almost 4. But I'm the woman that you thought was a mad, estranged woman that was out of her mind. You accused me of being drunk. No, it was me. I petitioned the Lord. He gave me a child. This is him." Verse 27, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted my petition. He heard me. His name is Samuel. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And in this moment, she takes him to Eli the priest and the judge in Israel who resided for 40 years as a priest in those positions. And she basically says, "He's yours, and I need you to raise him in a way that the Lord would be blessed by." Verse 28 ends with this, "And he worshiped the Lord there." And it was in this moment that Hannah, who had petitioned the Lord and prioritized her faith, understood her child's purpose. And right here, what's interesting is when you look at her child's purpose, you may be wondering, okay, what does that mean? Well, when you understand your child's purpose, I think what's interesting is that you need to know that children are not possessions to keep, they're callings to release. And in that famous passage in Psalm 127, they are arrows in the hand of a warrior. They are to be released. And where do we release our kids? We release them toward the target. And the aim is not merely to hit a target, but it's to hit bullseye. And that was what Samuel was intended to be. And here's the thing, is if that's going to happen, you need to realize that when God gives you children, and when God gave Hannah a child, faith formation begins early, and she knew that. Now, what's crazy is that the reason that I don't think the Bible records that she did some of the Jewish customs is because she never intended to keep the child for herself. She basically knew that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. The Lord gives me this child, and she basically from the onset said, "If you give me Samuel, you hear my prayers, and you answer, God, I will give you this child for your service." And Samuel is going to be raised up in the sanctuary under Eli's care, and she is going to go visit him often at the temple. And listen, she wasn't releasing her responsibility. What she was doing is saying, "This is my responsibility, but God, he's yours. Instead of me buying back his life, I'm giving you all of it. There's no need to sacrifice a lamb for him because he is yours. You use him. There's no reason to redeem him because I don't plan to keep him." Now, I don't know about you, but that's a really hard mindset for us as parents, right? We struggle because we believe that the children are ours. And what we need to realize is that children are a gift from the Lord, and they are a stewardship responsibility. And that's what Hannah understood. She basically invested him at a very young age to Eli and said, "Hey, listen, I need you to do faith formation." Now, Eli was also a priest and a judge for 40 years, but he had 2 children, Hophni and Phinehas, and they disparaged the work of the Lord. He didn't do a great job raising him, and so basically she was entrusting him to Eli, even though Eli hadn't done that great of a job. And it doesn't make sense. She's basically saying, "God, I'm going to give you this child, and I'm going to trust that you do what only you can." And God shows up in Samuel's life, and he makes himself known to Samuel, and Samuel becomes one of the greatest men of the Bible. You don't hear a lot of time about him because he's overshadowed by kings and prophets, but Samuel was a faithful man. And the reason he was faithful is because he loved God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength from a very early age. And friends, I think what we just have to realize is that we have a responsibility to be involved in those things. I don't know if you realize it, but the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. Now, that's not how we think because we're paying attention to wars and gas prices. Right now, we think the ruin of a nation begins at a White House. No, it begins in the homes of its people. And oftentimes we disconnect that. So listen, it is our responsibility as parents, as grandparents, to raise and produce spiritual champions. And here's what you need to realize is that spiritual champions are not being produced very often. Matter of fact, Out of parents who are in our society right now, fewer than 10% of parents have any sort of blueprint for raising kids in a godly manner. What that means is that they have a twofold approach. It's a laissez-faire, which is a hands-off approach, or a trial and error approach, which means it didn't work with the first child, but it might work with the fourth child. And it's a trial and error, but there's no intentional plan. But the reality is the Bible is saying, no, we should have an intentional plan. And the way that happens is realizing that there is a ton of research and data out there that helps us as parents grow our children up in the instruction of the Lord. There are so many ways for us to be strategic. And one of the things you need to know about strategy is this, is that a child's faith formation is being built by the time they're 15 months old to 13. So that by the time that your kid is past the age of 13, most of their faith formation is set, which means the way they think about the Bible, the way they think about Jesus, the way they think about whether Jesus was sinless or perfect or could he have been resurrected, most of that is set by the time they're moving into their 8th grade year. Now, I don't know about you. For many of us, that could be discouraging. And what I want you to hear is this, is we serve a big God and a redeeming God, and he oftentimes can redeem what we might have missed. And so listen, we don't have to worry about that. We have to trust God with that process. But what you need to know is that if you have littles in your home that are in that 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade years, listen, this is the time to be investing in them. This is the time to be thinking about what it is. And listen, a plan can be, it can be implemented in a ball field, but you have to have a plan. And right now, if we're not careful, we miss that plan. And here's the deal. The reason why we miss it is because most of us don't possess a biblical worldview. Look at this. Just 2% of all Christian parents with children under 13 possess a biblical worldview. So that means in this room, 2 out of 100 parents have a consistent worldview, meaning they could tell you about the Bible, about its solidarity in our lives. 2 out of 100, which means we got a long way to go. Just 1 out of every 5 parents of preteens is born again Christian. That's in our society. So many of our parents right now, they don't even know God. And so it's hard to give their children something that they don't possess themselves. 6 out of 10 born again Christians, 58%, believe that parents have the primary responsibility of development. But listen to this. But 1 out of 4 believe it is somebody else's job, primarily the church. So what's crazy is that so many parents in our day and age are actually subbing out raising their kids because they don't have a plan and they don't have it prioritized in their own lives. And so I would just say it this way. John Piper says this way. He says, one generation's compromise becomes the next generation's captivity. So where are we compromising? We can't give away what we don't possess. And it's our job to build spiritual champions. So then the question we have to ask is, why aren't we? And I would just say it's because parents lack the confidence. Think about the ways we don't have confidence, right? We can't teach our kids tennis, so we hire a tennis coach. We can't teach them to throw a softball pitch, so we hire a softball coach. Think about all the ways that we sub out our kids, to basketball coaches, to professionals, right? Listen, do you know how many people want me to walk their kids through salvation? They call me. Can we set up a time with a pastor? And listen, I would love to sit down with your kids, but I would love it if you could do it first. I want to partner with you, but more than that, I want you to be the priesthood of believers that God's called you to be. I would love to pray with your grandma, but wouldn't it be better if you prayed with your grandma? Y'all catching this, church? That's faith formation. Faith formation is not hire a preacher you like so that he can do all the work of ministry for you. No, that's opposite to the Bible. The Bible is actually saying we are a family together. We are a tribe of people raising our children in the instruction of the Lord. There are no professionals here, including me. I am a dependent person upon God. It doesn't matter what degrees you have. It doesn't matter how smart you are, what college you went to. The criteria is the same for all of us. When it comes to parenting, it's hard. We don't have the answers, and we need a God who does, and we need to follow him and make a plan and be consistent in that plan. That's the point. And here's the deal. The reason why is because we're to train up our child in the way he should go. But C.H. Spurgeon says it this way: train up a child in the way he should go, but make sure you go that way yourself. That's the aim. And you may wonder, is it even possible? And I just want you to see, as I've read over the years, there are 5 criteria, and really only 4 of them that you can control that produce spiritual changes. And I'm just going to run through them real quickly. You can see it. Number 1, knowing, loving, and serving God is the top priority of families that produce spiritual changes. So if you have a kid that's about to graduate and you want them to be a spiritual champion, the number 1 condition is that the family has to prioritize, like Hannah and Elkanah did in their home, that worshiping the Lord is going to be huge. And they're going to worship the Lord, and they're going to be known for that. Now listen, does that mean that you can't play sports? No. Does it mean that you can't be involved in band or other things that you want to be? No, it's not. It just means that as a family, you're going to prioritize your faith. Okay, so we choose selectively how many times our kids are going to be gone from those things. Can our kids skip church and play hooky? Absolutely, but not often. And that's just a conviction we have, and it's something you have to think through. So loving and serving God is the number 1 priority for those who produce spiritual champions. Number 2 is they are a part of an active, vibrant community of faith. Now I'm going to hop up to just like a preaching pedestal real quick, and I'm going to just kind of share something that's just unnerving to me in this society. Most of us are struggling to find an active, vibrant community of faith, not because there's not active, vibrant communities of faith, it's because we want to be a part of 3 of them. Or we want to be a part of 7 of them. We have our famous preachers we watch, and we compare our preachers with them. We have all the episodes we watch. We have all these different things. And then we struggle to find a church because we want the church to be about serving us, or because we're struggling to prioritize serving the Lord. And then if the church steps on our toes, we want to find another one that's a little more gentle or soft. Or we go to one that's gentle and soft, and we want one that's a little bit more in our face. And listen, I just want you to say this, or hear this. It doesn't matter where you go as long as a Bible-believing, teaching church in which they are encouraging you and your family to walk in the ways of the Lord. There are many great churches in Van Zandt County, Henderson County, Kaufman County. Find one and get plugged in there. And stay there for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Quit skipping around. It's killing our generation. And listen, one of the coolest things is the day is that I get to be a part of a commissioning of our children. And Kelly's parents are here, and they have been in the same church for the last 27 to 30 years that I've known them. Has it been perfect? No. Have they had pastors that were immoral? Yes. Have they had challenges? Yes. Low funds at times? Yes. But their faithfulness is that they've stayed there. And because of that, their church is healthy because people didn't bail. And they're probably going to scold me that I just said that because they're here in this service. But you just need to hear it. Things get a little hard in our church and we want to bail. Listen, find a church and belong. That's what helps produce spiritual champions. Third one is time devoted as a family's a huge factor. Most families right now spend less than 15 minutes a day together as a family. That's the average, which means if you were to poll kids in their small group, which I did recently, you're going to see kids that are on their phones anywhere between 8 and 14 hours. I kid you not. That was my 7th grade small group a couple of weeks ago. What does that mean? It means that they're coming home, they're dropping their bags at the front door, and they're going all their own ways, and you are too. And you got every screen on the house on. You're wondering why your bandwidth is so terrible and your internet sucks. And it's because, I'm sorry I said that word. I should not have. I should not have. Will you please forgive me for that? The reason why, though, is because we're going all these different ways. And we have no time around our table. And we wonder why we feel disconnected. And we wonder why our kids are into this vice or that vice. Or you wonder why they have no regard for themselves. And when they look in the mirror, they don't even know who they are. It's because of us. It's because of the things that we allow. And it's because we've gotten lazy and apathetic. And as a result of that, we are not spending time doing family nights, and we're not intentional around our dinners. And listen, in order to have a significant factor of spiritual change in your home, you got to spend 90 minutes together as a day intentional. It's an hour and a half. And that means in your car rides, hey, be intentional. If you got a junior in high school, you don't get car rides anymore. They're going for you to the grocery store. They're going driving themselves to school. It changes everything, which means that means you've got to say no to some things so you prioritize your families. You got to say yes to dinners together. You got to be thinking strategically. Have fun. Plan it. Be consistent in those ways. Give your children a biblical worldview. Learn the Bible yourself. About 24 years ago, it was actually 22 years ago. 22 years ago, I was teaching history at Wills Point High School. Bet y'all didn't know that. What's crazy is I taught some of the kiddos in this room. I was a young pup, had no idea what I was doing. Do you know what I did? I read the night before, and then I told them what I knew. That's all I knew. I didn't have any other plan. I wasn't a history major. I knew enough about Mesopotamia and how the Bible began, but outside of that, I was a day ahead of students. And I just want to tell you as parents, that's okay. Be a day ahead, a step ahead. You don't have to have all the answers. Just get a plan and be faithful to the Lord. Figure out ways that you can love and serve him. Here's the cool thing, is that your socioeconomic status has no correlation. So it doesn't matter if you are poor or rich. It doesn't matter your skin color. None of those things are requirements for spiritual champions. The other four factors are what make a difference. I just pray, church, that we would be intentional in all the ways that we need to. Let me pray for us. Father, I thank you for this morning. I pray that you would use this not to step on toes or to frustrate people, but Lord, to encourage them that there is a way that is right, and it leads to spiritual depth and formation, and it helps us to be all you want us to be. There is a way to walk in, and Israel struggled to do it because they did what was right in their own eyes. Lord, I pray that our church and these families in this room would not do what's right in their own lives, but they would seek to walk with you day by day as they walk in the way. We love you. We thank you for this morning. We pray that you would use it for your glory and the good of those who are the hearers. In Jesus' name, amen.